In the book of Genesis, after God has created Adam, one of these amazing things that happens is, it says that God brought all of the created things, all the animals, all the birds, all mammals, and they come before Adam, and Adam names them all. And he names them, and there's this, to imagine the creativity, first of all, that goes into this, but also this distinction and the uniqueness that was being placed on everything that God had made, and how important those names would be for all of those living creatures. And it's an amazing thing to think that if one of the very first things in the created world was names, what the created world would be like if there were no names. And there were no titles. There were no nicknames. There were no designations. And I think the first thing that would happen is all of us would be far less distinct, particularly in our own sort of consciousness on who we are, what we do, but also in the ways that we understand each other. Our world is one in which we define ourselves and we define other people by names and nicknames and titles. Now, some nicknames wrap around us sort of like warmth. Nicknames like Champ and Buddy and Kiddo that we were probably called as children, or maybe even call our children today. These are names that speak of love, and they speak of familiarity. They speak of belonging. Other nicknames, even when done with no, malicious intent, have effect. Names like troublemaker, high maintenance, drama queen, slowpoke, mama's boy. These names, interestingly, come to put identity markers on us as we mature and we get older. These names, we would say, don't necessarily celebrate who we are. They reduce us to what somebody else sees and assumes about us. And then there's titles, these formal designations, official statuses. They say authority. They say maybe something earned or a rank. Titles like doctor or professor or CEO or pastor, these communicate far more than just affection the way a nickname would. They instantly define something about us. Expectations, qualifications, the specific kind of relationship that we are going to have, whether close or distant. And amazingly, the Bible also has these profound names that not only reveal who we are, but how God sees us. And amazingly, within these names and titles, we find his longing and his love, the way he will relate to us. And so those titles are many. Specifically in this series, we're going to look at 4: disciple, friend, child, and bride. And interestingly, each of these titles, names, takes us a step deeper in relationship with God. Discipleship is sort of like the entranceway, and bride is the fullness of the object of God's desire. There is nothing more he is after than his bride. And so the relationship becomes, first of all, one of student, where we're learning. It's one of family. Then it's to belong completely and to inherit everything that the Father has will be ours as well. We share it with Jesus. And then finally, we become the bride. A name so unique that at times we don't even understand it. How is it that God would desire us the way a husband desires his bride? And amazingly about bride is it is something we can only be together. None of us are bride on our own. It is only when we are in Christian community and part of the family of God that we can ever become bride. And you can't become part of that without first becoming disciple. So we begin the journey through the Catalogue of Grace then by first understanding this high-stakes initiation, the term disciple. Because it's only by understanding disciple that we can fully come to understand the desire and love of God within the demanding terms of discipleship. And they are demanding. It's only by understanding what this means and what God reveals about himself through this name he places on us that we can fully enter into the joy that will be found in all of the other titles after this one. So that's where we're headed for this morning. We move to this title, discipleship. And if we were to take a poll, say 100 Christians, and we were to say, I want you to describe Jesus Christ, probably the overwhelming majority would use words like gentle, compassionate, and probably even non-Christians could get to saying love. And that's good. In fact, Jesus basically says that about himself. In his only self-description in the entire New Testament, Jesus says in Matthew 11:29, I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And those are beautiful, those are essential, timeless, unchanging truths about Jesus, and we should celebrate them. Yet there's this moment in the Gospels where we come to this moment when the Prince of Peace spoke some of the harshest, most exclusive, most demanding words recorded in the entire New Testament. Words that seem to be juxtaposed against the description of a gentle and humble Messiah. You've heard me say many, many times, we hold all truths in tension. God is love and God is just. And so we hold that Jesus is humble and gentle, and we hold that he is also sometimes very, very serious. In Luke chapter 14, what we find is Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem. And accompanying him is a large crowd. And they're drawn to Jesus by his miracles, by his healings, no doubt by the power of his teaching. We read elsewhere, it says that he teaches as one who has authority. His teaching was like nobody else's. And so this crowd is captivated, and they are excited to be in the presence and in earshot of this unique rabbi. And they're enjoying the immediate, tangible benefits of being so close to Jesus. Proximity to divine power has just present perks right then and there. And it's certain that this crowd on this day was like any other. It would have been a mixed bag. A mixed bag of people. Some were there for the right reasons, and some in that crowd had come to see a show, to receive a drive-through blessing, or even just to be entertained. What's going on in the neighborhood today? And so Jesus turns to that crowd, and he completely shatters the peace. The gentle and humble one makes everybody quite uncomfortable. And he issues an ultimatum that sounds, at first, almost cruel. It's an exclusion cause for only the most committed. We pick up in verse 25 of Luke chapter 14. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. Turning to them, he said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. Now, I just want to stop on this moment and say, this is not Jesus saying, I will not allow you to be my disciple. He's saying that if these are going to be your priorities, it won't matter. You won't be able to do it. It has nothing to do with what I'm keeping you from. You won't get there. You won't go through with it. This is on the listeners, not on God's heart. And whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and are not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Or suppose a king's about to go to war against another king. Won't he first sit down and consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If he's not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. In the same way, those of you who do not give up everything you have, cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor the manure pile, it's thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Oh, where's the gentle and lowly Jesus? The crowd asks. This is not how he was advertised. Hate? Hate my family? Hate myself? My own life? This sounds like an impossible burden. A cost too high to pay from the Jesus who said, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. The severity of Jesus' demand is evidence, though, church, and hear me, of the perfection of God's love. The demand is the evidence of the perfection of God's love. And that's really what we're going to be unpacking today. This is the central truth. Imagine if your house was on fire, for example. You're stuck. Everything's burning. And the firefighter gets there and they're here to rescue you and they shout to you as you hold your cat and your photo albums and your fireproof box. They say, drop it all and run. Drop it all and run. You wouldn't accuse him of being harsh. You wouldn't say, oh, what a burden. You'd thank him for saving your life and having the wisdom to say, the things in your hands are actually going to kill you. And so Jesus' words sound extreme. Hate your family, carry your cross, give up everything, hate your own life. But this is the firefighter in the doorway saying, you are on fire, drop it and run for your life. You know, we mistakenly assume, even though we won't do this with our own children, but we mistakenly assume about Jesus that perfect love must be easy. That it should only ever feel warm and comfortable. And yet not a parent here would go, that's a great way to raise kids. And what if the cost Jesus outlines here is actually not a punishment? What if it's a gift? What if this is protective measurements designed to secure our ultimate, deepest, most permanent, eternal good? What if that's why Jesus is talking like this? You see, church, Jesus is not trying to discourage followers here. He's trying to save them from the pain of becoming false disciples. And that's why he insists on clarity at the beginning. You'll know the terms before you start. And so today, as we wrestle with these harsh words, this is ultimately what we are going to consider. That Jesus' demand for radical discipleship reveals a God whose love is so protective, so redemptive, so serious, and so valuing of us, that he will not allow us to settle for anything less than everything he's offering. So how is this a revelation of Jesus' love? First of all, because in this call to discipleship, in the experience of discipleship, what we learn is God's love is both protective and it's exclusive. If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. So this first jarring command Jesus makes to this crowd, and what he's asking for is supreme allegiance. And before we all conclude, well, this possibly, it can't be possibly true, not in 2025, I want you to note that this is the language of jealous love. A love that refuses to share the object of its affection, which you maybe remember is very much the way God was with Israel. From Genesis all the way to the book of Matthew, the whole story in there, chapter after chapter, book after book, God is a jealous God. He does not want them to mingle with other nations. He does not want them to mingle with other gods. He does not want them to eat weird food. He doesn't want them to practice romance the way that other cultures and countries practice romance. He wanted them to be unique. And his heart is broken time and time and time again because essentially they commit adultery with other gods and other nations and other people. And his heart is jealous. Generation after generation, God is a jealous God. And so when Jesus uses the word hate here, he's not talking about malice. Jesus is actually using a Hebrew idiom. And if you're like me and you didn't do very good in English, idioms are these weird sayings, like where you say it's raining cats and dogs, and it's not actually raining cats and dogs, it's raining water. Or we say to, like an actor, hey, break a leg. These are idioms. Jesus is using an idiom here to make the point that what is left behind is incredibly valuable, and you've made a stake because you've chosen a competing claim. In this case, himself. And so he's saying, when he says you have to hate these things, he's actually saying you must love me so much that all other loves, even your best, most cherished loves, even the most goodest loves. Told you I didn't do good in English. Lee asked me to use simpler words. Goodest. You have to hate those by comparison to your love for me. That's what Jesus is saying. That the love for me is so great that then that love must be defined as the complete opposite. Because it can't be equal. It can't be the same thing. And that's actually protective love. Because think about how easily our loves are misplaced. We misplace loves all the time. I recently read an article this week that I get, I don't know, I think it comes on Wednesdays. And it's generally written to men, and this one was talking about 3 mistakes that fathers make with their children. And the first mistake, I loved it because you don't hear it in the parenting books too often. The number 1 mistake that dads make when raising their children is that they honor the children above God. And so we go, what does that mean? Well, it means that when a dad lets his schedule and his choices and his values and his marriage orbit entirely around his kids' comfort and passions and hobbies and emotions and their calendar instead of God's, then you're honoring your child above God. And the same is true whether it's honoring aging parents or whether it's honoring our grown children or our grandchildren or our career or our hobbies. What begins as a good love quietly turns into God. And so Jesus is looking at that and he's saying, this is why I am asking for first place. Not because I want to take from you, but because I want even your best loves to not cause you to walk away from me. And you will walk away from me if I am not first. And so, yes, this is a challenge, a huge challenge, but this is also where the protection comes in. You are vulnerable to wandering. And Jesus knows that the good things, when loved supremely, become hazards to our faith and burdens on our backs. If you have given your life to try to serving something other than God, you know it weighs on you. It will keep you up at night. It will make you feel like a failure. You live with shame. Whether it's your financial security, your kids, your career, these things are finite and fallible and they are perishable. You know, one of the great songwriters at this moment, Brian Johnson, who writes, a lot of our worship songs. I love his sort of approach to songwriting. He says, I only write songs that I can sing in heaven 10,000 years from now. If they only matter today in 2025, I don't want to sing them. And in the same way, that's sort of what Jesus is calling us to. You have to love what cannot perish, what will not end. And if we read through the New Testament, there is one thing that is everlasting. It's God, it's His love, it's His Son Jesus, it's the Holy Spirit, and it is our relationship with Him in a community of faith. That's it. You can't take the cars and the money with you. You can't take your marriage with you. Your kids will be there, but they're going to be God's kids in a way we haven't even imagined. And so this profound demand of exclusivity is in fact a revelation of the jealous heart of God that says me and me only. Because if it's not, you won't make it. Remember, he says it to the crowd. He's not saying this to the 12. He's not saying this to just Peter. He's saying this to the crowd. Now, the cost is counterintuitive to us. But to come to place Jesus above absolutely everything else is to know, in fact, the very essence of God's redemptive work. In other words, disciples learn God's love is redemptive, and it is transforming. It redeems, and it makes us something better. Whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. Not allow you, not you won't be able to pull it off. You won't do it. The condition for discipleship is this command to embrace sacrifice, which reveals a love committed to our sanctification, not our comfort. So for Jesus' first century audience, take up your cross. Well, they saw this all the time. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't metaphorical. To them, they went, oh yeah, we see this. I know a guy. And it meant a condemned criminal carrying his instrument of execution to a humiliating, agonizing, vulnerable death. And for us today, the cross is a call to daily death to self-will, to self-interest, to self-ambition. It's the countless moments we say no to what we want and yes to what God would want for us. And so we again ask, well, why would a loving God ask us to do something that is probably painful often? Because God's love is active, and I talked about this in our Revelation series. It's surgical, it's therapeutic. He refuses to leave us diseased. He cuts the cancer out of our bodies. And sometimes that hurts, and it takes healing and a period of time to get back to where we should be. But the love of God cuts to heal. Dying to ourselves is God's instrument to remove what's going to keep us from following him daily. It's necessary pain. Pain to remove the toxic, the diseased parts of us. The old self, as Paul calls it. Pride, comfort, self-absorption. Always thinking we're right, which are destructive to our souls. Mistrusting everybody, ourselves, destructive to our souls. Always making sure we're heard, destructive to our souls. God's love is so great that it is enough to put us under painful processes of transformation, because he has the highest goal in mind. What's the goal? Romans 8:29, to be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. And so we would ask, well, how are we doing with that? Are any of us there? Have we perfected the image of Jesus in our life? Of course not. And so God's going to keep working on us. But the challenge is that it's not a comfortable shortcut path to that kind of glory and holiness. If that's the standard, well, I got a long way to go. There's no quick way to get there. And I think it's important that I say this, picking up your cross, dying to self business, this rarely happens sitting in church on Sundays. You know, we're thinking about it, but let's be honest, we're all on our best behavior. In fact, I'm the only one talking at the moment. So where does it happen? Well, it happens when we walk out of the doors. It happens with our spouse. There's two options often in our relationships. We either kill or we die. You know, when tensions arise. I don't mean just over, if the meatloaf was overdone, but those big moments of conflict and disagreement. One of us is dying. So, kill, as James says. We don't get what we want, so we kill. Or it's dying to self. It happens when we don't get our way or our preference. Happens when our spouse disagrees with our opinions. That's when we practice dying to self. It happens when we choose not to force people to apologize to us before we can move on. We die to self when we don't make our time more important than everybody else's time. We die to self when we quit acting like we are in charge of everybody in the world. We do it at work when we're misunderstood and mistreated and unnoticed. We do it with our friends and our neighbors and our kids and our church family when we are patient and generous and forgiving. Those are the everyday moments, not sitting in the 2025 pews where we come to die to ourselves, or not. Now, I know well, because I am a very imperfect person, and I suspect you do too, that it is hard to do this perfectly. But the amazing thing is that the call is actually not perfection, it's faithfulness to it. It's faithfulness to the process. That's what God calls us to, faithfulness, not perfection. The great Brennan Manning, this deeply flawed, broken person, alcoholic priest, failure in every way, I just wrote these amazing books about the love of God and the brokenness of people and where that intersects. And in his book, The Ragamuffin Gospel, he says this, and this is going to give us a great big sigh of relief. He says, what makes authentic disciples is not visions, ecstasies, biblical mastery of chapter and verse, or spectacular success in the ministry, but a capacity for faithfulness. What makes authentic disciples? A capacity for faithfulness. Buffeted by the fickle winds of failure, battered by their own unruly emotions, and bruised by rejection and ridicule, authentic disciples may have stumbled and frequently fallen, endured lapses and relapses, gotten handcuffed to the flesh pots, and wandered into a far county. Yet they kept coming back to Jesus. And every time that we pick up our cross and die to ourselves in those conversations with our spouse and our kids and our coworkers, those are moments for this persistent faithfulness. That's the amazing thing. Not to do it perfectly, not to master it, not to never make the same mistake again, but to be faithful to do it as much as I can. It's this relentless choice to keep coming back to Jesus despite the guarantee that I'm going to fail at this again. But those are those moments to die to self too, to find grace. Another opportunity to learn that God's love is going to redeem me and it is transforming me all the way to the end until I resemble Jesus. Next, discipleship tells us that God's love is serious and it's faithful. You know, sometimes love is very, I don't know how to put it, but you know, it's silly, it's playful. But there's a seriousness to the love of God, a brevity to it, and a faithfulness in it. And so Jesus gives a couple parables in this deep challenge. He says, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and you're not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. When he first sit down, consider whether he's able with 10,000 men to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000. If he's not able, he'll send a nation while that other king's far off, and he'll ask for terms of peace. So Jesus reinforces this demand by giving these deeply common sense illustrations of calculated commitment. The builder and the king. Two parables, he's essentially saying, don't rush into this discipleship thing. Which is like a fascinating thing to say to evangelical Christians who are so about making a quick prayer and getting Jesus in your heart. Here Jesus is going, don't rush into this. You got to think about it. The nature of this demand is that God requires a commitment that is conscious, intelligent, enduring. And the reason he wants it is because he wants us to avoid false starts. False starts that result in spiritual failure and at times even public embarrassment. In Jesus' day, and to this crowd he's talking to, starting a project and then failing to complete it was an enormous source of ridicule and embarrassment. We start and don't finish stuff all the time. To do that in Jesus' day, that was like a lack of social grace. You embarrassed us all. Jesus is saying this to them, and they're all going, oh yeah. And today, in a spiritual sense, it's really not so different. As a pastor, I know that one of the major reasons people will step away from following Jesus, from coming to church consistently, by trying to live a sanctified life, is because the Christian community saw them start. And they sat here and we cared about them and we said, hey, how you doing? Where you from? Good to know you. And they're with us for 3 months and then they disappear. And it is too embarrassing to come back and face the questions on where have you been? The false start spiritually carries this weird shame. But the revelation of love and discipleship is that God's love is serious. Think about it. But it's also faithful. He gives us, as I've said, the full terms of this covenant up front. He doesn't deceive us with promises of ease. Jesus' call to discipleship was never a trick. It was never sleight of hand. Jesus isn't the friend, and I'm sorry if you have one of these, who says, come on a trip with me, my treat, and then surprises you with a bill once you're back home. Jesus loves us by being honest, and he says, I'm not going to lure you into following me, and then secretly charge you the ultimate price. And that's the beautiful paradox of faith. Jesus asks disciples to count their cost, but also to come to know that the ultimate cost that should have been theirs has already been paid in full because he's faithful. Discipleship is a costly call. It's sort of, again, to use the example of the friend who tricks us on the trip, that they say, well, can you get the airfare to Mexico and I'll cover the rest? It's like Jesus says, there's some cost here, but you have no idea my expense. Because the cost for me, as you consider your cost, which may at times be tough, but in comparison is nothing, it's crumbs. Jesus is saying my cost is emptying my glory, becoming sin, dying a humiliating, nearly naked death, experiencing the pain of God turning away, and dying alone and exposed for everything I never did. That's what I'll pay for. Jesus' blood is the evidence of his commitment, his faithfulness to our discipleship. Because the call to count the cost is not a demand for the highest payment, church. Contrary to how we might feel about it, he is not calling you to give him the highest. He paid it. It is simply a call for realism about the commitment required so you can be a disciple. Finally, disciples learn God's love makes us useful. This is an important message, I think, in 2025, where so many people seek relationship and career for meaning, for being useful, for mattering. It's like I've heard one of the tough parts about retirement. Maybe you're in that season of life, but like, what do I do now? I used to be useful. So Jesus says salt is good, but if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is fit neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It's thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Tell us what you really think, Jesus. We end where Jesus ends, with a vivid warning that ties all these radical demands together, the warning of uselessness. Salt is good, but if it's lost its taste, basically saying it's hopeless. How can it be restored? It's of no use for soil or manure. It's thrown away. And this warning demonstrates a love that seeks something amazing. I was really blown away by this, chewing on this week. God's love and discipleship is seeking our contribution to his kingdom. He is seeking us to contribute to what he finds most valuable. He is seeking us to contribute to the most significant work, and amazingly, he knows in it also the greatest fulfillment. In Jesus' time, if salt got damp, the distinctive preservative aspect of it, it was washed out. And so it was just a pile of useless, tasteless residue. And they get rid of it. And that's the nature of the demand. The disciple has to maintain their unique identity and influence, their savor, their flavor, by living a life of radical, yes, costly, yes, separation from the world's values. Jesus is saying, don't let the water of the world dampen and wash out your uniqueness. Don't let it make you useless. And so we go, well, what is being salty? It's actually about our commitment to Jesus. That is what makes us flavored. A believer who comes to choose Jesus above all else, and we know that person, they have influence on us. Their flavor, we feel it. And those people, we know them, they bring joy to God, and they make a tangible difference in a rotting world. The revelation of love in this is that God loves us then by granting us, inviting us into purpose and dignity in his kingdom. Don't be useless. Don't be a waste. Jesus loves all of us too much to let us squander this generational calling from Adam till now to fill the earth with the knowledge of the one high God. And a Christian who tries to maintain the comfortable balance, well, I got one foot in the kingdom and I got one foot in the world. Salt is washed away. I love that the more we think about this, the demand for saltiness is really just Jesus saying the prerequisite for a life of consequence is live your life in me. And I have not met a person yet who does not want to live a life of consequence. You cannot ask a 6-year-old, what do you want to do? And their hope is to do nothing and waste their life. Somehow God has placed in us that we are going to live lives of impact and consequence, of significance and importance. And he says, if you will live with your life in me, you will have more significance and consequence and importance and usefulness than you can ever imagine. The call into discipleship is the great words that Paul spoke over Onesimus the slave. If you remember this little story, and he says about Onesimus, he says, he was once useless, but now he is useful. That's the invitation. We're basically just salt shakers, church, looking to be filled up with something useful. Saltiness, it's worth saying, to go back a little bit, is not just telling it like it is. Saltiness is not just quoting Bible scripture like a AI program. Saltiness is that I am continuing to walk with Jesus. That's what flavors me. All right, sermon in a sentence one more time. Jesus' demand for radical discipleship reveals a God whose love is protective, redemptive, serious, and valuing, so much so that he will not allow us to settle for anything less than everything he's offering. So we started with the paradox of the gentle and lowly Jesus. giving a harsh command to the crowd. Hate family, self, renounce all that we have. And as we've explored the demands of discipleship, we've seen that the cost is simply a proof of the love of God. It's an invitation where God's love is revealed as so pure and so deep that he won't allow anything to come between his true disciples and our ultimate joy. And he's harsh to the crowd because he's protective. And he's saving us from the idols we're prone to love too much. And I don't think any of us here, if our kids or our spouse was constantly with corrupting company, that we wouldn't speak to the crowd and say something to it. I certainly would. He speaks harshly because his love is redemptive and he brings surgical transformation through the cross. His and ours. He's faithful. And he honestly demands calculated commitment to him. And he's purposed. He values us as effective agents of change in a broken world. And that crowd needed to be challenged. And I suspect a lot of them turned away and walked away. When they came to realize that Jesus wasn't a tack-on, he wasn't a piece of life, he wasn't a guru, he wasn't a religious symbol or an activity on Sunday mornings. When it's convenient, he's all-consuming. And that brings us back to the final sweeping command in verse 33. Those of you who do not give up everything you have cannot be my disciples. Church, do you understand I am not saying that to you? That's not my words. Those are the words of the gentle and lowly Jesus. The cost is indeed everything. But the magnificent truth is that the high cost of discipleship is the necessary path to the deeper intimacy that we find in the rest of the Catalogue of grace. Discipleship is what makes way for those other titles, child and friend and bride. Sometimes I make my own words into a slide for you. This is one of those ones. You cannot know the security of being his child, the intimacy of being his friend, or the union of being his bride until you have first accepted the terms of being his disciple. God created all people. Not all people are his children. His children are those who've accepted his son. One of the great voices on spiritual formation in the last 30, 40 years, the late Dallas Willard, said in his book, The Great Omission. I've actually used this quote here before. The greatest issue facing the world today, with all its heartbreaking needs, is whether those who by profession or culture are identified as Christians will become disciples. The greatest issue facing the world today is whether those who are identified as Christians will become disciples. Students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens into every corner of human existence. So if you've never consciously accepted the terms of this demanding revelation of love, the invitation is actually quite simple. Count your cost, and then realize that it is a crumb of what Jesus has paid for you. So before we come to the table today, Paul gives us this invitation to examine ourselves. Sort of like, the doctor would suggest we give ourselves self-examination so we might find something before it's too late. And so I think before we come to this table, we want to take a moment of quiet contemplation. I think it would be irresponsible to not. And here's your question that you can consider. And I'm going to give you like a minute of awkward silence to think about it. What is one thing? One thing. A relationship, a status, a financial security, a grudge, a wound, personal ambition, being right, getting your own way all the time, your comfort. What is one thing that you would never want Jesus to touch? So Holy Spirit, even now, I just ask that you'd speak to your people. Help us to think even now, what is the one thing in our life that we would say, Jesus, not that? Church, that thing, whatever it is the very thing Jesus is asking you to hate, so that you can find unfailing love in Him alone. And so today we've, in a way, stood in the crowd. Jesus has spoken to us. And the invitation is to come out. Come out. Come out, my people. Come out of that crowd that's present only for the show and a couple perks. Become a disciple, a follower, a student, and apprentice of Jesus Christ. To give up the temporary, the corruptible thing that we cling to. And gain the infinite, satisfying person of Jesus Christ who loves us and calls us my disciple. That we would learn from Him and be with Him. And that He would include us in this great catalog of grace.